What did polar traders see in 1893? The Ijiraq sighting. In the frozen desolation of the Arctic in 1893, a small convoy of British polar traders disappears under strange circumstances. One survivor returns with a story of a mysterious, shape-shifting creature the Inuit call the Ijiraq, a being neither human nor animal, bound to the ice and vengeance. As past betrayals and secret obsessions unravel, the line between man and monster blurs, and the truth hides in shadows no one dares explore. Chapter 1. The Frosted Horizon. Welcome to the Arctic, 1893. The wind tore through the skeletal rigging of the Aurora, rattling the frost-encrusted sails. Captain Elias Thorne's cheeks burned red beneath the fur-lined hood of his coat as he squinted across the horizon, half expecting to see the ice shift like living walls. The men murmured among themselves, their voices swallowed by the merciless howl. Few had survived the winter trade in these parts, yet Thorne's crew carried a stubborn hunger, of wealth, of survival, of legacy. It began as routine. Supplies were loaded in Baffin Bay, records checked, and the compass read. But the Arctic held secrets in its frozen heart, ones that refused the eyes of the uninitiated. By the second week, the ice pressed closer, unnerving even seasoned traders. The Inuit warned them of the Ijiraq, a being that could vanish and appear where it wished, luring men into death. Thorne scoffed, yet a chill crept along his spine. The warning was too precise, too hushed. On the third night, under a ghostly aurora that painted the ice in spectral green, the first disappearance occurred. Thomas Greer, the navigator, vanished while scouting the northern pass. His footprints ended abruptly at a jagged cliff of ice. Thorne felt rage and fear twist together, a bitter taste in his mouth. Orders were shouted, men armed themselves, but no trace was found. Only a shadow, darker than the Arctic night, moved along the edges of their camp. By dawn, suspicion had taken root like frostbite in Thorne's crew. Whispers of curses and betrayal slithered through the tents. Each man eyed the others with subtle mistrust. Captain Thorne's own brother, Jonathan, who had joined the expedition under promises of fortune, kept to himself more than usual, a strange intensity in his gaze. Thorne noted the tremor in Jonathan's hands, but did not ask. Survival required focus, not confrontation. Yet paranoia spread faster than frost. That morning, as they trudged toward a narrow ice gorge to scout a safe path, the men caught sight of something impossible. A figure, neither fully human nor entirely animal, with eyes that reflected the aurora itself, crouched atop a frozen ridge. It vanished before any could approach, leaving only a whisper in the wind, like laughter or a scream. Greer was gone, and the shadow of Ijiraq had arrived. Thorne clenched his jaw. Hatred, fierce and primal, burned in him, not for the creature, but for the weakness he felt in himself, for the doubt crawling through his men's minds. He swore silently in the frozen light that nothing, human or beast, would take them without consequence. Something waited in the ice, patient, cruel, and cunning. And then the snow fell harder. Next we discover why the Ijiraq's arrival ignites not just terror, but a chain of betrayals that will rend the crew from the inside out.
Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard?
Chapter 2. The Shadow Among Us. The storm had left a hollow silence. Snow drifted over the frozen tundra like a shroud, muting even the desperate cries of men. Captain Thorne stood over the campfire, his knuckles white around the scorched iron poker. Jonathan, standing a few feet away, avoided his brother's gaze, fiddling with a frost-bitten compass, as though it could tell him the truth he did not dare speak. Thomas Greer's disappearance weighed heavily. Every creak in the ice, every shadow in the snow, could be him, or something far worse. Thorn could feel the crew's fear, a tangible thing that coiled tight in their stomachs. Whispers of the Ijiraq, once dismissed as superstition, now held teeth. It was more than legend. Something in the air told him that. The Arctic was listening. By midday the men were restless. Supplies had dwindled faster than expected, and the ice path promised nothing but treachery. Thorn ordered scouts to reconnoiter, but each return was met with stories that contradicted one another, footprints that led nowhere, strange noises like cracking bones, fleeting glimpses of a dark shape vanishing into the snow. Some men swore they saw Greer's face staring through the frost, only to vanish when approached. Rage began to smolder in the crew, a dangerous kind of desperation. That evening, a scream tore through the wind. Men stumbled toward the source, finding not one but two bodies. Men who had been loyal since the start of the voyage, their eyes wide, mouths frozen in silent terror. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just lifelessness, as though the Arctic itself had claimed them. Thorn's stomach turned. Hatred, raw and volcanic, erupted inside him. Someone, or something, was killing them, and he swore to exact vengeance. Jonathan lingered behind the others, staring into the distance. Thorn caught the motion and grabbed his brother by the shoulder.
"Speak, Jonathan, what are you hiding?" His voice was ice and fire, a storm of authority and accusation. Jonathan's lips trembled. He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowed by fear. Something in his hesitation sparked a deeper suspicion. Could one of their own betray them? Or was this the work of the Ijiraq, an enemy they could neither see nor fight? The northern lights danced, grotesque and beautiful, casting strange shadows across the snow. Thorn felt the weight of centuries in that light, the Inuit warnings, the tales of vanished explorers, the whispers of revenge lingering in every icy fissure. The creature, if it was indeed real, was patient. It observed, learning, waiting. Thorn realized with sudden clarity that understanding it was their only hope, yet it seemed impossible. A faint, guttural sound rose from the ice cliffs. The crew froze. Every man's heartbeat thrummed like a drum of war. The sound grew, a low, mocking resonance, then stopped. Nothing. Silence. Then the unmistakable crunch of footsteps across fragile ice, heading straight for the camp. And at the edge of the firelight, a shadow moved, fluid, deliberate, watching, smiling. Next, we learn the true horror of what the Ijiraq wants, and how far human hatred can drive a man into madness when survival is at stake.
Chapter 3. Eyes in the Ice. The shadow lingered at the edge of the firelight, motionless yet alive with intent. Captain Thorn gripped his rifle, every muscle taut, as if the cold itself had sharpened his senses. The men's breaths formed clouds that froze before fading into the night, but their terror was hotter than any fire. No man dared move, yet none could look away. The figure shifted, subtle, deliberate, almost human, but its proportions were wrong, grotesque. The Ijiraq had returned. Jonathan's face was pale, eyes darting to every movement. Thorn noted the way his brother's jaw clenched, the way he trembled. Suspicion had begun to bloom like frostbite in Thorn's mind. Could Jonathan have known more than he admitted? Was it fear or guilt that kept him silent? The Arctic had a way of exposing secrets, and Thorn intended to uncover them, no matter the cost. The shadow vanished before the men could fire. A whisper, a breath against the wind, seemed to circle the camp, teasing their ears with sounds just beyond comprehension. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, and the words "It knows us," went unspoken but hung in the frigid air. Footsteps crunched in a pattern that made no sense, circling their tents, then stopping abruptly. Then, from the darkness, a low howl, neither animal nor human, split the silence. Thorn barked orders, forcing men to form a perimeter, rifles raised. Every instinct screamed danger, but logic demanded control. "Stay together," he shouted. "Watch the ice. Watch each other. Nothing moves without my say." His voice was firm, but inside a storm raged. Hatred for this thing, for the treachery that might lie within his own crew, burned hotter than any Arctic wind. Jonathan lagged behind as the others moved to follow Thorn's instructions. He stumbled, catching himself on a frost-laden post. The captain noticed, but said nothing. Suspicion coils edged tighter. Greer's disappearance, the corpses, the whispers of the Ijiraq. They had transformed a man into a hunter and a judge in one breath. Thorn realized he would tolerate nothing, not deceit, not weakness, not fear that might imperil them all. Suddenly, a scream shattered the night. Private Matthews had been seized, dragged into the snow by unseen hands. Thorn ran, firing blindly, rifle smoke mingling with frozen breath. But Matthews was gone. Only deep, jagged footprints led into a ravine of ice, then stopped. No trace of the man remained, only the faint smell of iron and the acrid tang of terror. The men gathered, trembling, their courage replaced by raw, simmering fury. They would fight, they would endure, they would survive, or die with vengeance on their lips. Thorn's gaze settled on Jonathan. His brother's hesitation, the way he lingered too close to the shadows, it had to be answered. Thorn demanded truth, yet feared it as much as the Ijiraq itself. Then a low, guttural voice, almost human, echoed from the ice cliffs. "He is mine, all of you, mine." The wind carried it, shaping it, twisting it into a promise of blood and fire. Thorn's hatred erupted fully, blinding, scorching, and he swore a vow the aurora itself might remember. If this creature was real, it would pay. If his brother hid lies, he would pay. If the Arctic claimed them, it would not be without witness. And through the snowstorm, Thorn glimpsed a face, horrifyingly human, yet wrong, eyes that reflected his own hatred, and vanished before he could point. Next, the crew will realize that the Ijiraq's hunt is not random, and that one of their own may be complicit, sparking a chain of suspicion that threatens to destroy them from within. Chapter 4. Betrayal in the Blizzard. The blizzard struck without warning, a wall of white that swallowed the camp whole. Thorn's men huddled together, rifles clutched, eyes scanning shadows that might be friend or foe. The wind shredded their voices, and even the fire's warmth seemed to vanish under the Arctic's cruelty. Every man's heartbeat pounded like a drum of war, each thump echoing the growing suspicion among them. Thorn's gaze kept returning to Jonathan. His brother moved silently, almost too deliberately, eyes flicking toward the cliffs where the Ijiraq had appeared. Thorn's blood boiled with a dangerous mix of fear and hate. Could Jonathan have known the creature's patterns? Could he have led it to them? The thought gnawed at him, feeding a dark fire that refused reason. A howl cut through the storm, closer this time, more deliberate, almost mockingly human. Private O'Malley tripped in the snow, clutching his arm, and fell face first into a drift. Before anyone could help, the howl returned, closer, sharper. O'Malley screamed, then silence. Thorn sprinted, rifle raised, but found only a smear of blood leading to a jagged ice ridge. The creature toyed with them, playing with their fear like a cat with prey. By midday, visibility was near zero. The men argued, tempers flaring like the frost-bitten wind. Hatred and suspicion intertwined, creating a tension as sharp as jagged ice.
Someone's hiding something, Thorn finally barked, the authority in his voice cutting through the chaos. If one of you betrays this crew, you'll answer to me, alive or dead. His words left a bitter taste in the air, mingling with fear and snow. Jonathan's lips twitched, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Captain, we're fighting shadows. How do you fight what you cannot see? The question was a whisper of accusation, yet he avoided Thorn's gaze. That hesitation sparked a storm of fury in the captain. Hatred flared, not for the Ijiraq, but for the possibility that a brother, a friend, could betray them in the coldest hell on earth. As night fell, the wind carried the faintest of whispers, voices layered, overlapping, human and something else. Thorn's mind strained to discern meaning. Then came a new horror. A set of footprints, too small to be one of their own, led directly to their supplies. The crates were ransacked, provisions gone, Greer's compass, tools, even personal effects scattered in the snow. Someone, or something, had been inside the camp. The men turned on one another. Accusations flew like bullets. "It's Jonathan!" "No, it's Matthews!" "Don't you see? It's the Ijiraq manipulating us." Thorn's hatred sharpened to a blade. He would cut through fear, lies, and ice alike. He would uncover the truth. And yet the Arctic seemed to laugh, the storm masking whispers, footsteps, and unseen eyes. Then, from the white oblivion, a scream echoed. Not human, not entirely. Jonathan froze, his face pale, lips parted as if to speak, yet no words came. Thorn moved toward him, heart hammering with both fear and rage. And then the snow parted, revealing a grotesque figure crouched upon the ice ridge. Greer, or what remained of him. His eyes gleamed with a hatred Thorn could feel through the cold, and a low, guttural laugh resonated in the storm. The Ijiraq had returned. Next, the crew will face an impossible choice: trust a brother or face the creature alone, as the line between loyalty, betrayal, and murder begins to blur in the blinding Arctic storm. Chapter 5. Frozen Loyalties. The wind tore at the men like whips of ice. Thorn's eyes never left Jonathan, whose posture had stiffened into a mixture of fear and defiance. The apparition on the ridge, the shape of Thomas Greer, yet grotesque, twisted, almost monstrous, watched them with glimmering, impossible eyes. The Arctic seemed alive, conspiring with the creature, mocking their weakness. Hatred and fear merged in Thorn's chest, hotter than fire against frost. Thorn barked an order. "Form a line. Do not let it circle us." The men obeyed, trembling, rifles aimed at a shadow that moved too fast, too fluidly for the human eye. Snow whipped across their faces, stinging cheeks and burning eyes, yet they held their ground. In that frozen moment, Thorn realized the Ijiraq was not just a predator, it was a mirror, reflecting their own rage, their own failings. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Captain, maybe it doesn't want us dead. Maybe it wants something else. Revenge." The words were barely audible, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Thorn felt a spike of anger. Revenge? Whose? Yours? Greer's? The creature's? Speak clearly, Jonathan, or I will make you regret hesitation. The hatred in his voice cut through the wind, sharp and merciless. The figure on the ridge moved again, sliding like shadow over ice, closer this time. Its eyes glimmered, almost human, almost recognizing something, anger, guilt, or fear in each man. Hatred rose again in Thorn. He felt it like claws inside his chest, gnawing at restraint. He would not let his men die in the snow without vengeance. Every instinct screamed that survival demanded both cunning and brutality. Suddenly, a second scream pierced the blizzard. Private Matthews had vanished, leaving only deep gouges in the snow, like the marks of talons. Thorn's fists clenched, rage turning his mind into fire.
The men began to panic, but he held them with the weight of authority and fury. "Control yourselves," he roared. "The creature thrives on fear. Do not give it this." Jonathan's face twisted, a shadow crossing his features. Thorn noticed the subtle hesitation, the way he lingered too close to the ridge. Hatred surged anew, not only at the creature, but at the idea that betrayal might come from blood. The Arctic had sharpened suspicion into a weapon, and Thorn could feel its edge cutting through their unity. The snowstorm began to abate, leaving a silence more terrifying than the storm itself. And then a voice, gremlin-like, yet unmistakably Greer's, whispered from the ice. "He will not survive. None of you will." The words slithered into their minds, igniting fear and hatred simultaneously. Thorn realized the truth with a cold, burning clarity. Survival would demand impossible choices. Trust no one fully. Fight everything. Hate everything. And in the frozen heart of this Arctic hell, vengeance would be the only currency that mattered. Then, from the ridge, Greer, or the Ijiraq wearing his shape, leapt, a blur of teeth and shadow, aimed at the camp. Next, the men will face a desperate fight for survival, as frozen loyalties fracture, and every act of hatred could either save them or doom them. Chapter 6. Blood on the Ice. The Ijiraq descended like a phantom, its grotesque form twisting across the ice with impossible speed. Captain Thorn raised his rifle, but his hands shook, not with fear, but with raw, burning hatred. Each second stretched, frozen in the Arctic chill, and the creature's eyes locked on him, human yet alien, mocking yet furious. Every instinct screamed survival, yet a part of him longed to strike with unreasoning fury. The men scattered, slipping in the frost, rifles firing blindly into the swirling white. Bullets thudded into snow and ice, sparks of defiance that accomplished nothing. The creature dodged effortlessly, moving like smoke, then landed amidst them with a grotesque, guttural snarl. Matthews had vanished moments before, leaving only jagged traces in the snow. Now the Ijiraq toyed with Thorn's crew as if they were insects beneath its claws. Hatred and terror fused, a living thing that roared louder than the wind. Jonathan tried to steady the men. "Do not let it separate us," he yelled, but his voice carried doubt, hesitation, flaws the Arctic did not forgive. Thorn's eyes burned with fury. Could his own brother falter when every second counted? Could someone he trusted betray him to this monster? Rage spiked violently, and he shook his brother. "Speak! If you hold back, you're as guilty as this creature." The snow fell heavier, white drifts forming jagged walls around the men. Thorn glimpsed movement. Greer, or something masquerading as him, had vanished into the storm, reappearing to strike another blow. Private Lennox fell screaming, swept aside by invisible hands. Blood spattered the ice, shocking against the pristine white, the scent sharp and metallic. Hatred erupted from Thorn like a living flame. He would make the Ijiraq pay, even if it destroyed him. Then, amid the chaos, a realization struck. The creature mirrored, too. Hem reflected their fear and fury. Each attack seemed to respond to the men's emotions, feeding on hatred, feeding on distrust. The Arctic itself had become an accomplice, amplifying their inner darkness. Thorn's jaw clenched. If they wanted to survive, they would have to master not only the ice, but their own fury. Jonathan shouted, pointing toward a narrow ridge. "There! Trap it there! It can't move as fast in the gorge!" Thorn seized the idea, ordering the men to converge. Hatred sharpened their resolve, burning away hesitation. Every man surged forward, rifles ready, hearts pounding with vengeance. They cornered the figure on the ridge, snow and blood mixing into a frozen tableau of desperation. For a moment, time froze. The Ijiraq,
human-shaped but wrong, stood trembling, its eyes gleaming with alien intelligence. Then it leapt toward Thorn. The captain fired, teeth bared, hatred poured into every shot, yet the creature vanished into the shadows, leaving only blood on the ice and an echoing, mocking laugh. Thorn's men were shaken, exhausted, yet alive. Hatred burned hotter than the cold. He stared at Jonathan, suspicion clawing at him. The line between brother and traitor, human and monster, had blurred beyond recognition. They survived, but at what cost? And in the distance, the whisper returned, carried by the wind. He will not forgive. He will not forget. None of you will. Next, the crew will uncover a chilling clue suggesting that the Ijiraq's vengeance is far more personal than they could have imagined, and that the betrayal among them may run deeper than blood alone. Chapter 7. Secrets Beneath the Ice. The Arctic night settled like a tomb over the camp. Thorn crouched beside the remaining fire, rifle at the ready, while the men huddled in silence, shadows trembling in the flickering glow. The Ijiraq had vanished, for now, but its presence lingered in every gust, every crack of ice. Hatred coiled in Thorn's chest, fierce and unforgiving, not just for the creature, but for the betrayal he feared among his own. Jonathan sat apart, staring at a tangle of footprints half buried in snow. The tracks twisted unnaturally, as though the ice itself had reshaped them. Thorn approached, voice low but commanding. "Jonathan, tell me what you know. Every hesitation could cost lives." The younger man flinched, eyes haunted, lips trembling. I've seen it before," he whispered, barely audible. "Years ago, near Cumberland Sound, a similar shadow, a warning left by the Inuit elders. They called it the Ijiraq." Thorn's blood ran colder than the wind. "A warning? You didn't tell me this before the expedition?" Hatred lanced through him, not just for the creature, but for the secrecy, for the deception. Jonathan's face paled, and he looked away, guilt etched deep. Thorn knew then that the Arctic did not merely test the body, it unearthed the sins of the heart. As the fire crackled, a discovery forced them from their tense vigil. Private O'Malley, previously thought missing, stumbled from the edge of camp, eyes wide, hands trembling. He carried a fragment of parchment, partially frozen, covered in strange symbols and crude sketches of men and beasts. The writing suggested ritual, warning, and something far darker. Revenge, not random, but deliberate, targeted. Hatred and fear surged in Thorn's chest. The Ijiraq was not hunting them by chance. It had chosen its prey. The men gathered closer, huddled against the wind, scanning the icy horizon, the seiches. Imbles on the parchment hinted at old grudges, ancient bloodlines, and a vengeance that transcended years. Hatred now twisted into dread. Could one of them unknowingly carry a debt older than themselves? Every man felt the weight of suspicion settle like frostbite. Trust was a fragile, fleeting thing in this frozen nightmare. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the ice beneath their feet. The ground shifted, cracks spreading like veins, threatening to swallow tents and men alike. Thorn's heart pounded, hatred sharpened to focus. He would not let them perish quietly. Vengeance demanded witness. Every instinct screamed that the creature was near, orchestrating the ice itself, testing their unity, their resolve, their hatred. Jonathan whispered again, voice trembling. "The Ijiraq. It remembers who wronged it, and it punishes generations." The words sank like knives into Thorn's mind. Betrayal and fear combined, and he felt his own wrath flare higher. Hatred, after all, was a weapon, and he would wield it. From the edge of the ravine came a shadow, darker than the snow, gliding toward the camp. A whisper, sibilant, almost human, echoed.
The debt is yours, and yours, and yours. The Ijiraq had returned. Next, the crew will discover the first sign that betrayal among them is far closer than anyone imagined, and that one of their own may have been complicit in summoning the creature's wrath. Chapter 8. The Betrayer Revealed. The first pale light of dawn barely penetrated the storm-laden sky. The camp was a frozen graveyard, tents sagging under the weight of snow, supplies scattered and ruined. Captain Thorne moved with deliberate caution, rifle ready, eyes scanning for any sign of the Ijiraq. Hatred coiled inside him, sharper than any blade, not only for the creature, but for the human treachery that he now suspected. Jonathan lingered behind, face tight with guilt, hands shaking. Thorne's mind raced, connecting clues, memories, and subtle inconsistencies that had been ignored in fear. The parchment, the unexplained footprints, the creature's targeted wrath. It was beginning to make sense. Hatred, previously unfocused, now found its target. Someone among them had invited the vengeance of the Ijiraq. The first sign came when Private Lennox, pale and trembling, pointed toward a ridge. "Captain, there. Footprints. They lead to Jonathan." Every man froze. The tracks twisted unnaturally in the snow, but the point was clear. Jonathan's hesitation, his whispered knowledge of the Ijiraq, the secrecy, everything now pointed to complicity. Thorne's hatred flared hotter than the Arctic sun, raw and searing. Could a brother betray blood for greed, fear, or darker ambition? Jonathan swallowed hard, gaze dropping to the frozen ground. I didn't summon it," he stammered, voice almost drowned by the wind. "But I knew. I should have warned you. I feared you wouldn't believe me." Hatred surged in Thorne's chest. "You lied. Every hesitation, every withheld truth. People have died. Tell me, brother, is there blood on your hands, or the creature's?" The men whispered, tension snapping like ice underfoot. Every heartbeat echoed in the hollow camp, every glance suspicious. Thorne's mind blurred with rage. Hatred for the Ijiraq, hatred for betrayal, hatred for the Arctic that had twisted them all into shadows of themselves. He wanted to strike, to punish, to see justice meted in fire and blood. Then movement on the ridge caught their attention. The Ijiraq, or Greer's twisted likeness, appeared, stalking them, its eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence. Jonathan flinched, almost instinctively stepping toward the creature. The men raised rifles, yet no shot rang out. The tension was suffocating. Hatred now mingled with fear, each emotion feeding the other, creating a storm more violent than any Arctic blizzard. Thorne stepped forward, towering over Jonathan. "Speak the truth, or we face death together." Jonathan's lips quivered. I told the elders of Cumberland Sound about our expedition," he confessed, voice low. "I did not know what they would call. But the Ijiraq, it was awakened. It knew my bloodline. I never meant this. I swear." Hatred surged hotter still, molten and unyielding. Thorne's jaw tightened. Whether by design or accident, Jonathan had drawn the creature to them. The Arctic demanded vengeance, and betrayal had fanned its fury. Every man felt the weight of suspicion, the crushing certainty that trust had been shattered. A shrill cry erupted from the ice below, a sound neither human nor animal. The Ijiraq had noticed their fracture, and now it advanced, hunger and vengeance burning in its eyes. Next, the crew will confront the terrifying choice: punish the betrayer and risk splitting the fragile group, or unite in hatred to face a monster that feeds on their fear and blood.
Did you know? In 1893, the Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen set out on the Fram expedition, deliberately allowing his ship Fram to freeze into the Arctic ice to drift across the polar sea. a new scientific strategy to reach the North Pole. Rather than a simple aimless drift, Fram was engineered with a rounded hull so the ice would push the ship upward instead of crushing it. Over the next several years, the crew collected vital oceanographic and meteorological data, a major advance in Arctic science, and Nansen himself made a then-record attempt toward the North Pole, reaching latitude 86° 13.6 N, farther north than anyone before. This expedition revolutionized polar exploration methods and expanded human knowledge of the Arctic's currents, climate, and geography, a legacy that still guides polar science today.
Chapter 9. The Edge of Trust. The Arctic sun barely pierced the gray storm clouds, casting pale shadows over the shattered camp. Captain Thorne's eyes burned with unrelenting fury. Jonathan's confession still hung in the frozen air, each word a blade twisting inside the crew. Hatred pulsed through every vein of the men, toward the Ijiraq, toward the treacherous brother, and toward themselves for surviving this long in such cruel isolation. Thorne forced himself to focus. Survival demanded more than anger. It demanded strategy, precision, and ruthless calculation. He knew the Ijiraq was watching, feeding on every heartbeat, every tremor of fear. The creature did not strike randomly. It sensed weakness, suspicion, hatred, and betrayal, and now the bonds of brotherhood had been shattered. Hatred had become a weapon they could not wield without consequence. Jonathan avoided the captain's gaze, hands trembling. "I swear. I only told the elders. I did not summon it. Please, let me help." Thorne's jaw clenched. Hatred twisted within him, sharp and unbearable. Yet survival required use of all resources, even those stained by deceit. "You'll act as my eyes," he growled. "Do not falter, or your hesitation will cost the rest of us." Jonathan nodded. Fear etched deep into his features, the raw hatred in Thorne's voice nearly as terrifying as the Ijiraq itself. The men began moving cautiously, rifles ready, scanning the ice for signs of the monster. Each footprint, each shadow, became a potential death sentence. Hatred sharpened their senses, a double-edged sword driving both fear and courage. Thorne noticed the subtle glances between men, some trying to reconcile trust with instinct, others consumed by suspicion. The Arctic had made them prey, and their own hatred made them vulnerable. Suddenly, a guttural sound echoed from the northern ridge. The men froze. The Ijiraq had returned, and it was deliberate this time, stalking, circling, waiting. Its eyes glimmered in the pale light, reflecting hatred and intelligence beyond human comprehension. Thorne felt a pulse of rage, hotter than any storm. The creature had taken Greer, Matthews, and others, and now it demanded more. Thorne barked orders. "Circle toward the gorge. Do not split. If one falls, we fall together." Every man obeyed, muscles taut, hearts hammering. Jonathan moved at the rear, eyes wide, showing the path through the ice while suppressing tremors. Hatred burned hotter as Thorne's mind calculated every risk. The creature thrived on fear. If they showed weakness, it would devour them all. The ice groaned beneath their weight, a warning of fragility. Thorne paused, hand clenched around his rifle. Hatred surged again, directed not only at the Ijiraq, but at the cold, the treachery, the endless expanse that had turned them into hunted shadows. Every nerve screamed vengeance. Every man knew the creature could vanish and strike at will, exploiting hesitation, exploiting suspicion, exploiting hatred itself. Then, a sudden motion on the ridge, a blur of shadow, humanoid but wrong. The Ijiraq's cry rang like a promise. "None of you survive. All debts must be paid." The men froze, caught between rage and terror. Hatred had sharpened them, but now the choice was clear. They could trust one another, or be destroyed separately. Next, the crew will make a desperate stand in the frozen gorge, where hatred, betrayal, and vengeance collide, and the Ijiraq's true motives begin to reveal themselves in horrifying detail. Chapter 10. The Gorge of Vengeance. The narrow gorge yawned ahead, jagged ice walls pressing close, funneling the crew into a frozen trap. Captain Thorne's breath steamed in the bitter wind, each inhale sharp as a blade. Hatred burned in his chest, scorching and relentless. Every step was measured, every glance taut with suspicion, especially toward Jonathan. Could he be trusted, or had betrayal already taken root too deep to stop? The men moved as one, rifles raised, eyes scanning shadows for the slightest motion. The Arctic was silent now, an ominous calm that Thorne knew was far more dangerous than the blizzard. Hatred coiled, a living thing inside him, demanding vengeance for those taken, for the corpses left in the snow, for Greer's twisted visage haunting their every thought. The Ijiraq had made its intentions clear. They were not just prey, they were punishment. Jonathan led the way, trembling, pointing out treacherous ice fissures. This should keep it from flanking us," he whispered. Thorne's eyes narrowed, hatred and doubt mingling. "You better not falter, brother. Hesitation will cost lives." Jonathan nodded, lips tight, every movement betraying fear and guilt. The Arctic magnified weakness, and Thorne could feel it radiating from his brother like a warning. Then a low hiss echoed from above. The Ijiraq appeared on a narrow ledge, crouched, eyes gleaming like molten ice. It seemed impossibly large, impossibly fluid, yet inhumanly precise. Hatred flared hotter than the wind, hotter than the frozen stone beneath their boots. Thorne's rifle barked, bullets sparking against ice, but the creature dodged with supernatural grace, landing farther down the gorge. The men shouted, forming a tighter circle. The snow beneath them groaned, fissures spreading dangerously. Hatred and fear coalesced into a tense, palpable energy. Thorne realized the creature was manipulating more than instinct. It was reading emotion, thriving on the rage, distrust, and terror boiling inside them. The Arctic had become a mirror, reflecting their own darkness back at them. Suddenly, a scream split the air. Private Lennox had slipped, falling into a crevice, vanishing from sight. The men hesitated, caught between instinct to save him and fear of the creature. Thorne's hatred boiled over. "Move! Save him or die trying! Fear will kill you faster than it ever will the Ijiraq!" They lunged, ropes secured, pulling Lennox from the ice, but not before the Ijiraq appeared behind him, its eyes burning with cruel intelligence. Jonathan froze. The creature's gaze seemed to recognize him, feeding on his guilt and fear. Hatred roared inside Thorne. He lunged, firing repeatedly, the Ijiraq retreating only slightly, hissing with a sound that was both human and monstrous. The creature's motive became clearer. It sought punishment, but it also sought revelation, exposing betrayal, fear, and hatred alike. Thorne realized, in a jagged flash of clarity, that survival meant mastering not just the ice or the Ijiraq, but themselves. Trust would be tested. Hatred would drive action, and vengeance would demand sacrifice. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the gorge. The Ijiraq had vanished, but its warning lingered. "None of you are innocent. All debts will be paid." Next, the crew will confront the ultimate test of loyalty, as the Arctic tightens its grip and the Ijiraq's true, horrifying agenda begins to reveal itself in ways no man could have anticipated. Chapter 11. The Trap Tightens. The gorge narrowed further, walls of ice looming like sentinels, reflecting the pale Arctic light with an almost mocking sheen. Captain Thorne's eyes darted along every crevice, every shadow. Hatred burned in his chest, molten and unyielding, not only for the Ijiraq, but for the creeping suspicion that human treachery might claim them as surely as the monster itself. Every breath seemed heavy with dread. Jonathan lagged slightly, glancing at the walls as if expecting the ice to move. "It's clever," he whispered. Thorn's jaw tightened. "Clever enough to kill us all if we falter," he growled, eyes narrowing. Hatred sharpened his focus. Every man's hesitation could spell doom. Every split second of doubt could cost a life. In this frozen theater of revenge, anger was survival, and trust was a weapon as fragile as ice. The men pressed forward cautiously. Each step echoed across the gorge, magnified, amplifying their presence like a signal. Thorn could feel the Ijiraq watching, waiting, feeding off the tension, the fear, the hatred. The Arctic had become a crucible, burning away civility and exposing raw animal instinct. Hatred surged, a living thing, driving him forward, demanding vengeance for Greer, Matthews, Lennox, and every man swallowed by the merciless ice. Then a sound, a whispering hiss that twisted around the cliffs, made every man freeze. The Ijiraq appeared on a ledge above, crouched like a coiled predator, eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence. Hatred flared hotter, blinding. Thorn's rifle barked, shots echoing against the ice, sparks flying, but the creature moved like smoke, almost impossibly fast, its shape shifting, nearly human, nearly monstrous. The monster's laughter was like ice cracking beneath weight, and the Arctic seemed to tremble in resonance. Jonathan froze. The Ijiraq's gaze locked on him for a heartbeat, too. Hat stretched impossibly long. Thorn felt his own hatred intensify, not just toward the creature, but toward the sense of betrayal that clung to Jonathan like frostbite. Could a single hesitation have brought them here? Could guilt have summoned this horror? Thorn's mind burned with fury. Hatred had become his compass, his weapon, his survival instinct. The creature leapt down into the gorge, stalking toward the men. Thorn shouted orders, forcing the crew to tighten ranks, but the ice groaned beneath them. Every step carried the risk of collapse, of plunging into a frozen tomb. Hatred and fear intermingled, sharpening reflexes, driving them forward. They could not falter. The Ijiraq thrived on weakness, and hesitation meant death. Then Jonathan spoke, voice trembling but steady. "There's a narrow ledge ahead. If we can lure it there, it can't escape." Thorn's eyes flared with wrath and hope. Hatred would be weaponized, anger channeled into precision. Every man moved as one, hearts hammering, eyes locked on the shifting shadow ahead. The Ijiraq hissed again, a sound of rage and cunning, circling, probing, testing their resolve. Hatred had sharpened their senses, but could they survive the trap they were about to set? Next, the crew will attempt their desperate gambit, forcing the Ijiraq into a deadly confrontation, and in doing so reveal horrifying truths that will shake even Captain Thorn's resolve to its core. Chapter 12. The Ledge of Judgment. The narrow ledge ahead was barely wide enough for one man, let alone the entire crew. Captain Thorn's eyes narrowed, hatred coiling in his chest like molten steel. Every man moved with deliberate care, boots crunching against brittle ice. The Ijiraq was watching, of that Thorn was certain. Every instinct screamed that the creature knew the trap before it was set. Hatred sharpened resolve, a weapon against fear. Jonathan led the way, pale and trembling, whispering directions. "Left here. Keep low. It can't climb this section." His voice carried the weight of guilt, the weight of secrecy, and Thorn's fury flared hotter. How many men had already fallen because Jonathan had withheld knowledge? Hatred burned bright in every glance Thorn cast at him, yet survival demanded cooperation. The Arctic had stripped them to raw essentials: anger, focus, and vengeance. The Ijiraq emerged suddenly from a fissure in the gorge wall, a blur of shadow and malformed human shape. Its eyes glimmered with intelligence and malice, a mirror of their own hatred reflected back at them. The creature hissed, a sound that seemed to scrape the very soul, and crouched as if ready to leap. Thorn's blood boiled. Hatred propelled him forward. Every shot fired, every command shouted, was a declaration. This monster would not claim them without suffering in return. Private Lennox tripped on the icy edge, sliding dangerously close to the abyss. Thorn grabbed him, dragging him back just as the creature struck. Hatred erupted, furious and pure, propelling men to act with a precision born of desperation. The Ijiraq moved faster than thought, slashing at shadows, slipping through narrow gaps, forcing the crew to cling to every ounce of courage. Every instinct, every ounce of loathing for this monster became a shield against its relentless assault. Jonathan's hands shook as he adjusted a precarious rope across the ledge. This should hold it," he whispered. Thorn's eyes flared, suspicion and rage mingling. "Do not falter," he spat. Hatred surged, tightening around him like a vice. The Arctic had stripped them bare. Now only action, precision, and vengeance could save them. The Ijiraq leapt, a horrifying blur, teeth bared and claws raking ice. Thorn fired, every bullet driven by fury and grief. The creature hissed, wounded but undeterred, landing atop the narrow ledge where escape was impossible. Hatred flared into focused action. Thorn and his men pressed, rifles and ropes ready, forcing the Ijiraq toward the edge. Every heartbeat carried the rhythm of vengeance, every breath a declaration of survival against impossible odds. Then the creature froze, eyes locking on Jonathan for a heartbeat that stretched like eternity. The whispers of the Arctic carried its cruel promise. Blood calls to blood. Debts must be paid. Hatred surged hotter than fire, and Thorn realized the truth. The Ijiraq was not just hunting them, it was hunting him, his brother, their lineage, the sins of the past manifesting in frozen flesh. The trap was set. The Ijiraq had nowhere left to flee. Hatred burned in Thorn's chest like a living thing, and every man knew that survival and vengeance would demand sacrifices they had not yet imagined. Next, the confrontation will escalate into a deadly clash, where hatred, betrayal, and Arctic fury collide, revealing truths that may shatter the crew completely. Chapter 13. Clash on the Ledge. The narrow ledge shivered beneath their boots, brittle ice threatening to fracture under the weight of desperation. Captain Thorn's eyes burned, hatred coiling tighter with every breath. The Ijiraq crouched before them, a monstrous blur of shadow and distorted human shape, eyes glimmering with cruel intelligence. Every instinct screamed danger, yet Thorn felt a darker fire, raw, searing hatred for the creature that had stolen friends, mocked their fear, and revealed the cracks in their trust. Jonathan stood beside him, pale, hands trembling, yet resolute. "It knows us. It knows our fear," he whispered. Thorn's jaw tightened. Hatred surged. "Then let it taste the fury it has earned." Every man gripped his rifle, heart hammering in time with the crackle of ice beneath them. The Arctic had turned their bodies into instruments of vengeance, their hatred into armor sharper than any steel. The Ijiraq leapt first, a blur of teeth and claws, its movement unnatural, fluid, terrifying. Thorn fired, bullets embedding in the ice, sparks flying. The creature hissed, a sound that seemed to scrape the very soul, and lunged again, narrowly avoiding a rifle barrel. Hatred surged through Thorn like molten iron. Every shot, every movement was driven by rage, the desire to punish, to survive, to end this nightmare. A scream echoed across the gorge. Private Lennox had slipped, tumbling dangerously close to the abyss. Thorn lunged, dragging him back, eyes locked on the Ijiraq as it circled, calculating, feeding on every flicker of fear and hesitation. Hatred sharpened focus. This monster thrived on their weakness. Their fury became their weapon. Every man knew that survival demanded harnessing the darkness that the Arctic had revealed in them. Jonathan took a deep breath, adjusting a rope across the ledge, his hands steady despite the cold and terror. Now, we force it to the edge. Thorn barked orders, moving with deadly precision. Hatred surged hotter with every second, every swing of a rifle, every shove against the creature. The Ijiraq hissed, eyes blazing with fury, yet it was slowly back toward the precipice. The ledge trembled, cracks forming beneath the struggle. Hatred erupted fully, an unyielding weapon, as Thorn lunged forward, grabbing a rope and yanking the creature. Its scream was a chilling mixture of human and beast, echoing off the ice walls, carrying centuries of vengeance. Hatred propelled every action, every heartbeat, until the Ijiraq teetered at the edge. For a breathless moment, time hung suspended. The creature's eyes locked with Thorn's, reflecting hatred, fury, and something almost human: regret, pain, vengeance. And then, with a guttural cry, it slipped, vanishing into the abyss below, leaving only a scream that faded into the frozen wind. Hatred burned out like fire in the cold, replaced with trembling relief. Thorn collapsed against the ice, chest heaving. The men gathered, pale and exhausted, staring into the gorge where the Ijiraq had disappeared. Hatred lingered still, a reminder of what had driven them, what had nearly destroyed them, and the terrible truths they had uncovered about betrayal and vengeance. Next, the crew will grapple with the aftermath of the Ijiraq's fall and the lingering secrets that threaten to haunt them long after the Arctic has claimed its toll. Chapter 14. Shadows of the Past. The Arctic dawn was muted, pale light brushing over the fractured camp like a ghost. Captain Thorn knelt by the edge of the gorge, staring into the abyss where the Ijiraq had vanished. Hatred had carried them through the battle, yet now it lingered, coiled tight, a reminder of the terror and betrayal that had brought them to the brink. Every heartbeat echoed with the screams of the lost, every breath a reminder of vengeance carried to its edge. Jonathan stood nearby, shivering from both cold and guilt. Thorn's gaze lingered, sharp and unforgiving. "Do you understand what your silence nearly cost us?" he demanded. Hatred still burned like fire in his chest, tempered now by exhaustion. Jonathan nodded, voice trembling. "I never intended—" Thorn cut him off, jaw tight. "Intentions don't keep men from the ice. Your hesitation, your secrecy, people are dead because of it." Hatred and fury radiated from him, but beneath it lay something more, an acknowledgment that survival had demanded they harness this darkness, even against one another. The men moved through the camp silently, gathering what supplies remained. Hatred lingered in their eyes, a coiled, smoldering flame, but it was accompanied by grief and relief. The Arctic had exposed them, stripped them to raw instinct, and forced them to confront betrayal, fear, and vengeance. Every glance between men carried suspicion, every breath carried the weight of bloodshed and survival. Private Lennox approached Thorn, voice low. "Captain, the markings on the parchment. They weren't just warnings. They spoke of generations, bloodlines cursed, debts unpaid. The Ijiraq. It wasn't random." Thorn's eyes narrowed, understanding flickering. Hatred flared anew. This creature had been hunting them not solely for survival, but for something older, darker, a vendetta stretching across time. Each life lay, each betrayal had fed its purpose. Jonathan swallowed hard, glancing at the gorge. It knew me, my bloodline. The elders warned me. I thought it was legend. I didn't think it would follow us. Hatred and guilt intermingled, a dangerous mix. Thorn's fists clenched. The Arctic had made every man confront not only monsters in flesh, but monsters in themselves, the betrayal, the fear, the unrelenting anger that had kept them alive. A wind swept through the gorge, carrying a faint echo, almost imperceptible, of the creature's last cry. Hatred and grief surged together, a reminder that their ordeal was not over. The Ijiraq had fallen, yet the consequences of its vengeance lingered in the hearts of the survivors. Every man knew that the Arctic had imprinted lessons of fear, betrayal, and rage indelibly onto their souls. Thorn finally spoke, voice low but commanding, carrying the weight of survival and rage. "We live, but we are not whole. The Arctic has shown us the truth. Hatred can be a weapon, but it can also be a chain. We carry it, always." The men nodded, pale faces etched with exhaustion, yet eyes burning with a mixture of relief and lingering fury. As the wind howled across the ice, carrying snow in biting sheets, Thorn realized the Ijiraq had left more than terror behind. It had revealed truths, tested bonds, and ensured that the memory of hatred, vengeance, and betrayal would haunt them forever. Next, the crew will journey deeper into the Arctic to uncover the origin of the Ijiraq and the ancient vendetta that had brought death to their doorstep. Chapter 15. Echoes of the Ancients. The survivors pressed deeper into the Arctic wasteland, every step a battle against frostbite, exhaustion, and the gnawing echo of hatred that still lingered in their hearts. Captain Thorn led them, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the Ijiraq, though the creature had vanished into legend and shadow. Hatred, though tempered by exhaustion, still burned like coal in his chest, a reminder of the lives lost and the betrayals endured. Jonathan trailed close behind, shoulders hunched, carrying both fear and guilt. "The elders, they said the Ijiraq is older than memory," he murmured, voice trembling. "It hunts bloodlines, punishes sins long past." Thorn's jaw clenched, hatred flaring. He had survived the creature's attacks, yet the Arctic had revealed that vengeance was not random. It was deliberate, ancient, and unforgiving. Every hesitation, every secret, had brought them closer to death. The men followed silently, the wind slicing across their faces. Hatred coiled in their veins, sharpened by each memory of the fallen. They had learned to fight, to survive, but now they sought understanding. The parchment, the markings, the whispers of Greer and the vanished crew, all pointed to a truth hidden beneath centuries of ice. The Ijiraq was no mere predator. It was a guardian of ancestral wrath. Suddenly, a faint glow shimmered beneath the snow. A cave entrance, half buried and jagged. Thorn signaled the men to halt. "This is it," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of suspicion and determination. Hatred burned in his gaze. The Arctic had forged them into warriors of necessity. If the Ijiraq's origins lay within, they would confront it, uncover its truth, and perhaps find a way to end the cycle of vengeance. Inside the cave, shadows twisted like living things. The walls were etched with carvings, humanoid figures, grotesque, some fused with beasts, others bound by chains of ice and blood. Jonathan gasped. These are the legends, the Ijiraq. It wasn't always this form. It was punished, bound, and now it seeks retribution across generations." Hatred surged anew. The creature had been wronged, yet it had become a harbinger of terror, punishing the innocent for sins long buried. Thorn's eyes roamed the carvings, tracing the lines of fury, sorrow, and vengeance etched into stone. He felt the weight of centuries pressing against him. Hatred had driven him through survival, yet now understanding demanded more, comprehension of the force that had stalked them, and the grudges that had shaped their torment. The Ijiraq was a legacy of wrath, ancient and precise, its vengeance a mirror of the darkest instincts in every human heart. A sudden chill swept through the cave. The wind carried a whisper, sibilant and cruel. Blood calls to blood. The debt remains. Hatred flared hotter, nearly blinding. Thorn realized that to survive, to end this, they would need to confront not only the creature, but the sins of their own lineage, the secrets buried within Jonathan's blood, and the choices that had summoned this nightmare from the ice. The cave trembled, as if the Arctic itself waited, holding its breath. Hatred, fear, and awe merged into a single burning resolve. The crew knew that the confrontation with the Ijiraq was far from over, and that the truth they sought might demand more than blood. It might demand vengeance returned in kind. Next, the crew will face revelations about their own pasts that connect them to the Ijiraq's ancient wrath, forcing them to reckon with sins they never knew they carried. Chapter 16. Bloodlines and Betrayal. The cave's shadows seemed alive, flickering against the ice walls as the men ventured deeper. Captain Thorn's boots crunched over frost-hardened debris, every step weighted with suspicion and fury. Hatred still coiled in his chest, a constant scorching reminder of the dead and the near betrayals that had nearly destroyed them. Each breath carried both fear and unrelenting resolve. Jonathan moved quietly, tracing the carvings on the walls. His eyes widened, lips trembling. "Captain, these markings, they are my ancestors, my bloodline, intertwined with the Ijiraq's wrath." Thorn's eyes narrowed, hatred sharpening like a blade. "You knew this before we left," his voice hissed, a blend of fury and accusation. Jonathan swallowed, hands shaking. "I suspected, but I never believed it would reach us. Not like this." Hatred surged hotter, molten and relentless. Secrets had nearly killed them, and now the full truth emerged. The carvings told a story older than memory. Humans bound the Ijiraq in punishment for a grievous betrayal centuries ago. Its vengeance had been sealed in ice, yet bloodlines connected to those original sins were cursed. Jonathan's lineage, intertwined with the ancient wrong, had made them prey. Hatred flared within Thorn, directed at both the creature and the hidden sins that had summoned it across time. Their survival had been fueled by fury, yet the knowledge now threatened to unravel everything. A low rumble echoed through the cave, and the wind carried a whispering voice, sibilant and cruel. "Blood pays blood. Debts endure." The Ijiraq's presence was palpable, though unseen. Hatred surged, driving every man to grip rifles and fists alike. They had fought shadows, storms, and betrayal, but now they confronted the origins of the nightmare itself. The Arctic had sharpened them, their fury a weapon, their distrust a shield, yet understanding demanded more than hatred, it demanded reckoning. Jonathan's voice quavered. "It's not just me. Everyone here, linked by sins you may not even know." Thorn felt the weight of suspicion tighten around his chest. Hatred burned at him again, directed at history, at fate, and at the knowledge that human treachery, secrecy, and fear had summoned a horror older than they could comprehend. The Ijiraq's wrath was deliberate, precise, and unforgiving. Suddenly, the ice beneath them shuddered. Figures, shadows of the past carved in living ice, emerged from the walls, humanoid and monstrous, echoes of those wronged centuries before. Hatred surged hotter, raw and unrelenting. Every instinct screamed survival, yet comprehension gnawed at the men. Their bloodlines, choices, and hidden betrayals had been stitched into a tapestry of vengeance. The Arctic had stripped them to their core, revealing the darkest corners of the human soul. Thorn clenched his fists. Hatred, fury, and grief merged into a single blinding resolve.
They had survived storms, betrayal, and the Ijiraq's terror. Now, to end this, they would confront not only the creature, but the sins of their own ancestors. The cave was no longer a refuge. It was a tribunal of blood and vengeance, and every man would be judged. Next, the crew will face the Ijiraq itself, and the confrontation will force Jonathan and Thorn to reckon with sins, bloodlines, and vengeance in ways that could destroy them all.
Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons, places, or events is purely coincidental.
Chapter 17. The Ijiraq returns. The cave trembled as a sudden gust tore through the icy corridors. Captain Thorn's muscles tensed, every nerve screaming. Hatred burned in his chest like molten iron, hotter than the Arctic wind outside. The Ijiraq had returned, its presence unmistakable, a shadow darker than the night itself, eyes glimmering with centuries of wrath. Every instinct told him that hesitation now would mean death. Jonathan stepped forward, pale, hands trembling as he traced the ancient carvings one last time. It knows. It knows our blood, our sins. Everything, he whispered. Thorn's gaze snapped to him, fury sharpening into steel. Then we show it our hatred, he growled. We survive, or we die trying. But it will pay for every life, every betrayal, every horror it has wrought. Hatred flared, fueling the men with a ferocity born of loss and fear. From the shadows, the Ijiraq emerged fully, a monstrous blur of human and beast, movements fluid, almost impossible. Its eyes locked on Jonathan for a heartbeat that stretched to eternity. Hatred surged in Thorn's chest, directed at the creature, at the bloodlines that had bound them to this curse, and at the Arctic itself, which had forged the monster and tested their resolve. The men raised rifles, hands shaking, hearts pounding, yet every shot was deliberate, each one fueled by anger and vengeance. The creature hissed, a sound like cracking ice and human agony combined. It circled them, stalking, testing their unity. Hatred burned hotter, shaping their movements, sharpening their instincts. Every man understood that survival required both fury and precision. Hesitation would mean the abyss. Thorn's eyes scanned the Ijiraq's form, noting its rhythm, predicting its strikes. Hatred had made them deadly, but it had also revealed the fracture lines of fear and suspicion that threatened to destroy them. Keenly, the Ijiraq lunged at Jonathan, a blur of teeth and claws. Thorn reacted instantly, shoving his brother aside and firing point blank. The creature recoiled, wounded, snarling with rage and intelligence. Hatred erupted fully, a weapon forged in the Arctic, as the men closed in, cutting off escape, forcing the Ijiraq toward the frozen wall of the cave. Every motion, every swing, every shot carried vengeance, blood for blood, fury for fury. Jonathan stumbled but remained upright, realizing for the first time the power of survival fueled by controlled hatred. The creature hissed, realizing its prey was no longer panicked, no longer fractured by fear. Hatred, focused and precise, had become their strength. The Ijiraq's gaze met Thorn's one last time, as if acknowledging both respect and rage. Then, with a final guttural shriek, the creature lunged at the ice wall, dislodging shards, and vanished into a cavern below. Silence settled, heavy and tense. Hatred lingered, coiling like smoke, a reminder of what had driven them and what they had endured. The Arctic had tested them, the Ijiraq had punished them, and vengeance had been paid. But the echoes of betrayal and bloodlines would haunt them forever. Next, the crew will confront the ultimate truth of the Ijiraq's existence, and the final choice that will determine whether their legacy is salvation or doom. Chapter 18. The Truth Beneath the Ice. The cave was silent except for the distant dripping of melting ice. Captain Thorn's breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, eyes scanning every shadow. Hatred still simmered in his chest, raw and unyielding.
though tempered now by exhaustion and clarity. The Ijiraq had vanished, or so they believed, but the ancient carvings whispered truths that chilled them deeper than the Arctic wind ever could. Jonathan stood beside him, trembling. "Captain, the Ijiraq. It wasn't just vengeance. It's a sentinel, a guardian of debts left unpaid, wrongs committed generations ago. My ancestors, they wronged it. We're the consequence." Thorn's jaw clenched. Hatred flared, hotter than fire in snow. "And the men we've lost, all collateral, all warnings. It's not done with us yet." Every word carried the weight of history, betrayal, and vengeance. The Arctic had revealed not only the creature, but their own bloodlines, sins that had been dormant until now. The carvings on the walls told a grim narrative. Humans had bound the Ijiraq centuries before, a punishment for a transgression so profound that its wrath endured beyond lifetimes. Those connected by blood to the original betrayal carried the curse forward. Thorn understood now that survival was never about brute force alone. It required confronting the sins they had inherited, acknowledging betrayal, and embracing the hatred that had fueled their defiance. Jonathan's eyes brimmed with tears. "Captain, the creature. It was never merely hunting us. It was testing us, measuring loyalty, measuring rage, to see if we could end the cycle." Hatred surged anew, sharper, hotter. Thorn's fists clenched, nails biting into his palms. "Then we end it," he growled. "We confront what we are, what our bloodline carries, and we survive. If hatred is the weapon, then we wield it with precision." A sudden gust of wind echoed through the cave, carrying a faint whisper, a sibilant echo of the Ijiraq's voice. "Debt must be paid." Thorn shivered, rage and fear intertwining, yet he understood the cycle could end, but only if they faced it directly, only if they acknowledged every betrayal, every secret, every sin embedded in their blood. Hatred, once a destructive force, could now be the key to survival. The men moved cautiously, circling the chamber where the Ijiraq had last been seen. Each footstep was deliberate, each breath measured. Hatred sharpened their senses, every instinct heightened, every muscle coiled for the confrontation that would determine whether they lived or died, not just in body, but in legacy. The Arctic had been the crucible. Now, understanding was their weapon. Then a low rumble shook the cave. Shadows shifted. The Ijiraq emerged from the ice, not lunging this time, but standing, eyes fixed on Jonathan and Thorn. It hissed, a sound carrying both ancient wrath and recognition. Hatred burned fully now, as raw and unrelenting as the frozen wind. The time had come to face it, to end the centuries-old reckoning, and to decide whether blood and vengeance would define them or be laid to rest. Next, the final chapter will deliver the climactic resolution. Vengeance, hatred, and survival collide in a confrontation that will seal the fate of the crew and reveal the ultimate cost of the Ijiraq's wrath. Chapter 19. Reckoning in the Ice. The cave shivered as if alive, the Arctic wind forcing itself through every fissure. Captain Thorn stood at the edge of the chamber, rifle in hand, heart hammering. Hatred burned hotter than any fire, coiled deep and relentless. The Ijiraq crouched across the icy expanse, eyes glowing with the fury of centuries. This was the moment of reckoning, bloodlines, betrayal, vengeance, and survival converging in one final confrontation. Jonathan stepped beside Thorn, trembling but resolute. "Captain, we face it. Together," he whispered. Hatred surged through Thorn, not just for the monster before them, but for the betrayals, the deaths, the centuries of vengeance that had followed them like a shadow. He nodded. "Together, brother. We finish this, or we die knowing the debt is paid." every man's breath misted in the freezing air, every heartbeat echoing in the hollow chamber. The Ijiraq lunged, a blur of shadow and inhuman speed. Hatred sharpened Thorn's reflexes, guiding him, coiling in his chest like molten steel. Bullets struck ice and flesh, the creature hissing in pain, yet undeterred. It moved with intelligence, testing their resolve, exploiting hesitation, feeding on fear. Hatred, however, had become their weapon, channeling grief and rage into precision, into survival. Jonathan found courage in his lineage, in the acknowledgement of ancestral sins. He acted decisively, stepping forward to flank the creature, guiding it toward a fissure in the ice. The Ijiraq hissed, claws raking the frozen surface, eyes fixed on Jonathan with a mixture of recognition and fury. Hatred surged in every man, focused, blinding, unforgiving. Every shot, every movement, every heartbeat was a strike for vengeance, survival, and the closure that had eluded them for generations. The fissure beneath the creature groaned. Thorn lunged, rope in hand, and the Ijiraq teetered at the edge. Hatred burned, hot and pure, driving them to act with a final, unified force. With a guttural, inhuman cry, the creature toppled into the abyss below, its scream echoing through the cave, then fading into the icy silence. The Arctic held its breath, and in that frozen stillness, the centuries of wrath seemed to dissolve into the void. The men collapsed to the ice, exhausted, eyes scanning the shadowed chamber. Hatred lingered still, a smoky residue of fury and survival, but it had done its work. The Ijiraq's vengeance, ancient and precise, had been confronted and laid to rest. Jonathan shivered, voice low. "It's over." Thorn nodded, gaze distant, haunted. Hatred had kept them alive, had guided their fists and rifles, but it had left scars deeper than any wound. Outside, the Arctic wind howled, a reminder that the wilderness would endure, indifferent to blood, vengeance, or survival. The crew emerged from the cave, battered but alive, carrying with them the lessons of betrayal, courage, and the power of hatred harnessed for purpose. The Ijiraq was gone, but its legacy, the fear, the vengeance, and the ancient debt would linger in memory forever. Captain Thorn stared into the frozen horizon, jaw tight, fists clenched. Hatred had been their crucible, and they had survived it. But the Arctic had proven one immutable truth. Vengeance always leaves a mark, and some debts, though paid, never fully fade. The Ijiraq had vanished, but its shadow remained, etched into bloodlines, carved into ice, and written forever into the hearts of those who dared confront it.